And welcome back to Chicago Bulls Insider. Today we're talking about NBA draft scenarios for the Chicago Bulls. We're going to be talking about if they should trade up, if they should trade down, should they trade for players like Paul George or Jonathan Kuminga on draft night. We're going to be talking about a lot of different situations here in this particular episode. And so before we go ahead and we jump into it, I first want to remind you to slam dunk on that subscribe button, just like Modest Mazzella slam dunks in games. And so in exchange for slamming on that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Chicago Bulls. So make sure that you hit that like, you hit that subscribe, and you join the Chicago Bulls Insider family as we talk nothing but Chicago Bulls basketball. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into it as we are talking about NBA draft scenarios for the Chicago Bulls. And so I saw this article that was on ClutchPoints, and I thought it was a terrific article. And it's really talking about 4 of the best trade scenarios using the number 12 pick here for the Chicago Bulls. And I love how this article really starts off. It talks about 3 things that the Chicago Bulls should really take a look at when they are evaluating the player that they're going to take here at number 12. And so, the first part of this article, they're talking about risky high picks. They talk about overlooking talent, and they also talk about development hurdles. And so all 3 of those, I think, are something that every NBA franchise really deals with. And I think that that is something that each franchise should definitely take serious, because if you don't take those 3 things serious, you're probably going to end up with a player that does not work out for you. And so let's start with point number 1 listed in that article. And it's talking about risky high picks here. And so in relation to the Chicago Bulls, one of the examples that it's talking about here is that not taking a balanced player and really going for the upside and the development on a player. And so what that simply means is that this franchise would go into this draft selection, and you're thinking about, okay, hey, if we get to maximize the development of this player, then this player is going to reach this type of peak. And so you see it all the time in these NBA draft profiles that, hey, if you can develop them into this, then, hey, they'll become a great, terrific jump shooter. They'll be a 2-time all-star, they'll be this, they'll be that, whatever the case may be. And so it's a lot of that is banking on the fact that you are going to be able to get the max out of the development standpoint. So, with that being said, look, I think that the Chicago Bulls definitely should look for a more balanced player, a more NBA ready type of player. That really minimizes the risk here, because when you're talking about risky high picks, you're really banking a lot on the upside. And so when you think about that, I mean, you could look back and maybe say that perhaps was the case with Patrick Williams, is that, look, you're looking at the upside, you're banking on the fact that, this player is going to get there. And if they don't get there, then, that's where you could run into some trouble there. And so, that's point number 1, where the Bulls are, look, if they're going to keep their pick number 12 and pick number 40 or 45, you cannot go and just go after risky players there. And so next up, as far as overlooking talent. And so the 2 examples that were listed in that article were Tyrese Halliburton in 2020 and then Jalen Williams in 2022. And so, look, the Tyrese Halliburton one, that definitely stings a bit, because, I went back and I saw a tweet there where he had talked about how he felt like he would be a great fit for the Chicago Bulls. And clearly we went with Patrick Williams. And so Tyrese Halliburton went on to be drafted at pick number 12. We picked Patrick Williams at pick number 4. I mean, obviously you don't know what's going to happen there, but we see that Tyrese Halliburton is pretty good, right? And so, that is where you really have to trust, I think, a lot in just your scouting and just kind of your player evaluation, which is something that really we'll find out with the Chicago Bulls, moving forward here, because if this team is going to turn it around, they're going to have to take scouting and evaluation very seriously, because I think that the bottom line for the Chicago Bulls, if they're going to rebuild this team back up to being a contender, it is going to come via the NBA draft. That is where you are going to look to really get the base of your team. Yes, you're going to get some free agents. Yes, you're going to execute a trade, but a lot of your core comes from the draft. And so that means that, yes, you are going to have to evaluate talent correctly. If not, you are going to let players that really could be a great fit for you, could be really NBA ready, pass by and go to other teams and be a huge impact. And so that is point number two, where if the Bulls are going to keep their pick, they absolutely cannot afford to overlook talent. Next up, development hurdles. And so that's listed here in the article. And it's talking about this being where essentially you have a player that, number one, you're talking about role clarity. And so with Coby White, one of the things that he's really faced, I think, in his career so far with the Chicago Bulls is that his role has been very much up and down. And so when you look at a player like Coby White, one would have to wonder that, look, you are seeing how well he did this last season. We've been seeing what he did the season before. What would have happened with this player if his role would have been more clearly defined? And so, yes, I know that the team certainly has changed since he's been here. And yes, now he's playing a different offensive philosophy. He's alongside of Josh Giddey as well, so making those adjustments. But that is something that you have to think about with your draft selection is what is the role that you see this player in? Because if you do not have a defined role and that player is going up and down in the role, you really could be setting them up for failure. Next, with a team system, if you're drafting a player into your system and you know that you like to open up the floor, you know that you need a mobile big, you know you need a player that maybe can get on the box and create his own shot. I'm not saying that he has to necessarily be a back to the basket, type of player, but if it's like a Derek Queen that is good enough, with his handle, he creates angles and things like that, and he could really take off in the half-court game, and his shot can come along, and you can afford, that time in your team system, then that's a player that you want to go with versus a player that just doesn't, from a scheme standpoint, fit. And then you also don't have a role for him, as far as the clarity there, that could spell disaster for that player. And then lastly, I love how it points out coaching and structure, which is something that if you watch the Chicago Bulls, there is always going to be talk around coaching. There is not, I don't think, a video out there where I have not seen Billy Donovan mentioned in the comments there. And so look, that is always going to be something there with the structure, the coaching around that player. It's all about coaching them up, right? And so that is something that is always going to be important with whoever you draft at pick number 12 and pick number 45 to point that out, because it's not just the first round selection, but it is too your second round selection. And so that is point number one in this article here. And these are the three things that the Bulls must seriously take in consideration here moving into this pick, and also to moving forward as you continue to rebuild out this team. And so next, let's go ahead and jump into the scenarios that the Chicago Bulls could really do. And so, one, they could trade up, and we're going to talk about the rumor out there that maybe they would want to trade up. They also could trade down, which is something that was brought up in this article. And then they could execute a draft night type of trade. And so let's go ahead and jump into that. And so starting with a draft night trade. And so Jonathan Kuminga, right? And then it's a package that it's just suggesting here with Kuminga, which would include the 12th selection and additional assets. And then they throw Lonzo Ball in there, saying that he certainly would have to be in the trade talks here. You're trying to get a seasoned player or a high lottery pick. And so Lonzo Ball, you would think, would be into that package. And so let me start with this Jonathan Kuminga situation here. And so I do think that this is something that the Chicago Bulls should definitely take a look at. I would like to get Jonathan Kuminga over to the Chicago Bulls. I feel like that this is a guy that is an NBA champion. I think he's proven enough as a young player, and I think that he just needs a change in scenery. I do feel like the Chicago Bulls, the way that they run their system and everything, would be a great fit. Going back to clarity with the role, I think that you can get a more defined role with Jonathan Kuminga. Point being with him, his role has changed with the Golden State Warriors. Has been very much up and down. And that may be why you're seeing a player that has been very much up and down. So I do feel like that if the Bulls were to get him, it would make some sense here. Now, situation is for him to come over to the Chicago Bulls, I think it is most certainly going to be a sign and trade. I don't see the Golden State Warriors letting him walk for nothing. And I do think that the Golden State Warriors would come to a conclusion to say, look, we do not necessarily see you maybe in the future plans here, but let's help each other out. Let's get you to your destination. And then we also get something back in the deal. And so do I think that Lonzo Ball would make sense for the Golden State Warriors? I do think he would definitely be a piece they would be interested in. I continue to say this, that Lonzo Ball would be like a Sean Livingston for them. And for the people out there that would say, okay, well, they would be getting a little older here. Well, they're trying to maximize the window that they have with Steph Curry. And so they still do have some youth there. And if you have a piece that you simply don't see fitting with this and you're trying to maximize this window, I think that this would be somewhat of a pivot here that they would be looking to go with Alonzo Ball. I also do think that Vooch is very much still on the table. I think that if there's a deal to be had with the Golden State Warriors, you most certainly should look to move Vooch as well, because we know that the Golden State Warriors absolutely need a center. If you watch the NBA playoffs, they struggled with the Rockets, even though they got past them, but they needed a big. And so I know Vooch doesn't give you everything defensively, but still he would have maybe provided a little bit more of a punch for the Golden State Warriors that they could use, especially if they're healthy with Steph Curry. So I think that both of those players would help out a lot. Now, the question is, when you're talking about additional assets, I think that that's where it gets a bit too rich for me. Based off what this article is saying, I couldn't see the Bulls giving the Golden State Warriors additional assets, which I think you probably are going to have to think about that. I think the Golden State Warriors would want to have a younger player come back. Now, would that be a Patrick Williams? I would say that his trade value is pretty low. I do think that maybe a player like Coby White would be, an interest to them. And I also think Ayo Dosunmu would be an interest to them as well. And so, I think that between those players, and then also too, if they want some more draft capital, I would say absolutely not, because the Bulls are going to have to turn things around with their draft picks. And so you don't want to go out there and put it all on the table just for, a seasoned young player. And so next for the Bulls, as far as a trade up is concerned. And so, there's a rumor out there that perhaps the Philadelphia 76ers would be interested in maybe, trading their third pick, or at least I've seen articles about that. I've seen videos about that. And so I really wanted to go into that, and just doesn't make sense. And so, look, I think if the Bulls wanted to trade up, they do have some pieces that they could try to get up there. And I think particularly when you're talking about the Philadelphia 76ers, and just looking at this, like I said, because this is one of those rumors that's out there, I just don't see anything where I see the Philadelphia 76ers trading out of the first round. I think that there's a lot of, hey, the Bulls would hold on to their 12th pick, and then they would also get the third pick. To do that, you would have to give up so much, I think, to the Philadelphia 76ers. And I'm not sure that that's going to happen. Plus, you would have to probably take on Paul George and his situation here. And I just think that when you look at Paul George and you look at just the contract with Paul George, like, I just could not see, a situation where it makes sense for the Chicago Bulls to take him on, because just with the contract alone, I mean, it's wild, because he also has a player option at the end of this contract that I'm saying it just wouldn't make sense for the Bulls to do that. And I just think that you would probably be giving up too much to get up there to, again, pick number 3. And for the Philadelphia 76ers in a loaded draft to just come out of the first round, I don't think that that's realistic, as you're looking at the contract here for Paul George. Can you imagine the Chicago Bulls taking on this type of contract with the injury history that Paul George has had? And really, it seems like the mess that the 76ers have gotten into, like I said, they're probably interested if you're going to take on Paul George's contract like this. But still, the Bulls would have to give up so much to the Sixers, I think, in order to get the third pick and hold on to the 12th pick. So I don't see that that's realistic. Next up, the next thing that's talked about in this article is could the Chicago Bulls trade down? And so trading down here, it mentions that trading down for several picks, and then also to acquiring a veteran center like Robert Williams III or Jonas Valanciunas. And so, Here's the deal, and here's what I think about this. I think that this is probably not a likely scenario as well, as far as trading down for the Bulls. And I would say simply because AK has not shown us that. He's not shown us that he values first round picks like that, which is why I just wouldn't see a scenario in which the Chicago Bulls would be trading down and gaining some more picks. I don't see that happening necessarily. It's possible, but again, I just don't see that being a likely scenario based off of how AK in the front office has kind of moved. And so next, just talking about the Chicago Bulls and what they could likely do, and that's hold on to their actual draft selection. And like, what do you do there if you're looking to hold on to the draft selection? And so, I think that one, the Chicago Bulls have to really avoid the high risk in their draft selection. So we talked about that before. And one of the things that was talked about here by Casey Johnson recently on his show Fast Break, you also can find this exact thing that he said. It's a clip of what he said here in a Bleacher Nation article that is on by Elias Schuster on Bleacher Nation, and talking about just knowing the direction now that the Chicago Bulls are going via draft. But he's saying that, the Bulls, or what he's hearing is that the Bulls are looking to focus really on stylistically how whoever that pick is in the first round will fit with the new philosophy. And so I like that when you're talking about the fit and just how that's going to work with where the Chicago Bulls are going with the team and how it's set up and things like that. That makes a lot of sense. That goes into the first part of the video when we were talking about, hey, when you're getting a player in and they're getting a defined role, like it's a role that definitely would fit that type of player. And you could see that player could hit the ground type of running, so to speak. And so talking about emulating the Indiana Pacers and also playing fast and getting deep with two-way players and wing depth and front court depth. Like what you're talking about right there is you're talking about identity. And so I love that if the Chicago Bulls are looking to really focus on that in this upcoming draft. I think that you're wanting to get players that are going to be in a role to where they can help out this team, but they're also going to help you with the identity of your team. And so when you're talking about the Indiana Pacers, this does go into the philosophy that AK has talked about, and a lot of people have joked on, where he's talking about having, these 9-10 good players or whatever it is. But I think essentially what he's trying to say there is having a team that is deep and a young team that you can rely on. And that happens by going out here and hitting on these draft picks. And yes, you will eventually acquire some more players like a Jonathan Kuminga and stuff like that via trades, but you have to execute here via the draft. And so I would love for us to take a guy like a Derek Queen. I love that. I also think like a Cedric Coward. I think that he would be terrific when you're talking about two-way players. When you're talking about these polished players, before we talked about Renaud at the center position. I know he's not slated to go in the first round, but I think that if you're thinking that way, then certainly if you want to get aggressive and try to trade up in the second round, it's not going to cost you as much. Then you go get a player like that, because that is a player that is certainly going to fit with what you're trying to do and would be an immediate impact here. And so anyway, you guys let me know in the comments here what you guys are thinking about with the Chicago Bulls. Do you think that they will trade Lonzo Ball? Do you think that they would trade Coby White? Do you think that the Chicago Bulls would trade up? Do you think that there's a team that would realistically bite on that? And just what would that look like? Because again, for the Bulls to have 2 picks in this draft, I think you are going to have to give up a lot to get that type of draft capital in this draft class, because I just don't see a team like the Rockets trading out. I don't see a team even like the 76ers trading out. I think that they would swap with you maybe, but still, I think you're going to have to give up a lot to get that. And next up, do you think the Bulls should trade down? Do you think that AK, maybe he does want to get a lot of picks back? I don't see that happening. Again, his last deal, he didn't even want to pick. And so I don't see him now moving forward with that. Next, do you think that the Chicago Bulls should trade for Jonathan Kuminga? Do you think that this is something that the Bulls absolutely should explore? Do they explore it on draft night? Do they explore this after draft night? Because remember, he's a restricted free agent, so you're going to have to take care of him as far as financially here with the contract, and it has to make sense, for the Chicago Bulls with the salary cap and everything else. Remember, they still have to take care of Josh Giddey here, which I do anticipate that happening. And lastly, what are you guys thinking about the Chicago Bulls as far as keeping the 12th pick here? Are they really going to take those three things in consideration when it comes down to it as far as risky high picks? Are you thinking about, hey, are we going to get or looking for a player that's more NBA ready, or are we banking on the fact that there's a ton of upside, but it's going to be on us to develop this upside? Because I don't know if the Bulls necessarily have the personnel and then the time like that to put in a player or put into a player like that to get them to the next level. I don't know if we've necessarily seen that, especially if you're going for, a big swing like that. Next, as far as overlooking talent, what do you guys think about that as far as the Bulls and just taking care of the evaluation standpoint? Do you feel comfortable with where the Bulls are at as far as looking at players and you trust that they're going to hit that way? And lastly, with the developmental hurdles that can get in the way, whether it's the team system, the role clarity, the coaching, and the structure, do you guys feel comfortable here with the Bulls and whoever they draft at pick 12 and 45 right now? They have 2 picks. They could get more if somehow we get some more. So anyway, you guys let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking. And look, as we always say, look, go Bulls, and I will see you guys on the next one. All right, peace.